The Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Hi everyone! Today we are going to talk about growing plants from seeds. It's a very fun project. A lot of people have tried this. Some have been successful. Some have seen some issues arise. Well, I'm going to help you with those problems and help you have some really vigorous, healthy, bushy plants that you can be proud of, and you can also share with friends and family or even swap with them. My name is Loretta Bailey. I am a Tarrant County Master Gardener, a certified cross-timber citizen forester, and a Texas Master Naturalist. So my entire life really evolves around plants, anything green. I love being in the yard, and I am going to teach you all the training I have received on growing seeds and tell you some of my personal experiences and just some tips and tricks that I have learned along the way. So why should we start plants from seeds? Well, you can save money. You can grow your own plants. It's very economical, and it's also fun. You can swap with friends and family, with your neighbors. You can get a jump start for spring, and generally just learn about plants and experiment with them. Indoor seed starting tips and overview. I will go through this list quickly because we are going to expand on them as we move along. You will want to choose a sunny window for your seeds. If you don't have a sunny window, you can use grow lights, but those are optional. By sunny window, I mean a south-facing window, okay? Because you're going to get morning to evening sun in that window. West and east-facing windows are okay, but they're not great, and you will have to use a grow light because you're only getting part sun in those windows. You're either getting morning sun or late afternoon sun. So south windows are key in growing seeds. Seeds germinate better in a warm environment. So if you are cranking up your AC or don't utilize your heater in the cooler months, your seeds may hesitate to germinate. That means to pop out of their seed shell and to grow. So you may want to invest in a heated mat. These grow lights and heated mats really aren't that expensive if you look online and if you get a smaller unit. Commercial producers of plants, a lot of them use the heated mats to expedite the process and to get the seed to germinate and grow so they can get those plants out to market faster. Seed starting soil is best. It is not a marketing gimmick. The seed starting potting mixes will state that on the bag, like you see on the top left and top right. It is going to be a more sterile environment for those seeds that are susceptible to pathogens like fungus and bacteria. So you will have better success if you start with a proper soil. You can use regular potting mix, but there is that risk. So I do recommend the specific potting mix if you can find it. Plant seeds and keep them moist, but never ever soggy. Most plants don't like just sitting in a saucer of water. So if you have found that you've overwatered, simply dump it out. Your soil should always be like a moist sponge, like a moist wrung out sponge. Okay, it shouldn't drip. Plant seeds at the right depth. Let's say you have a seedling, a little seed that is the size of a granule of salt. Well, you don't want to plant that 2 inches deep because that little seedling will never be able to push through all that soil and make it to the light. So be sure to read the package instructions on your seed packet, or look online for information on the proper depth. Okay, once you have planted all of your seedlings, they're growing, you're real excited, it's time to thin them out, and we will talk about that some more. Then you need to harden off your plants over time, and then transplant or bump up if necessary and at the right time, and only if needed, fertilize at half strength. When to start seeds indoors. Our last average frost date is March 21st. So you'll want to follow the seed's packet instructions. Every seed is going to be different, but generally speaking, plant seeds indoors about 4 to 8 weeks before the average last frost date. So this will equate to about late January to the end of February. When to start seeds outdoors. Anytime from spring through fall. Check seed packet instructions. It varies by plant. Some seeds are better sown directly outdoors versus planting them in little pots inside. So be sure to do your research on that. Types of plants and definitions. This is important so you can go out and get the proper seed according to your plan. Annual plants grow that year only. So from seed to mature plant back to seed in 1 year life cycle. So annuals will not return the next year. So you'll have to repurchase or save seeds to replant them again. A biennial takes 2 years to complete its life cycle, whereas a perennial will return year after year. A tender perennial is going to be frost sensitive and may die in winter in our zone here. A hardy perennial will survive without being protected, and it will 100% return year after year. At the very bottom there, I said there is an exception to every rule. We live here in North Texas, and we have seen some drastic climate changes here, so keep that in mind. It's not always a promise that they will be hardy, but usually speaking, the hardy perennials will return. Okay, growing plants from seeds. Make sure you label your stored seeds. Put the name on them, the date, and where you collected them. Were they collected by your neighbor and given to you? Did you collect them from your backyard? Did your mom give them to you? Make sure you record all of that information because seeds tend to look alike, and the following year you might forget what you stored. Also, be sure you fully dry out your seeds. If you're uncertain, you may want to store them in an envelope or a paper bag so they can continue to dry out. But do lay them out, let them dry out for the most part, then put them in a sandwich bag or whatever you like. I like the sandwich bags, but I ensure my seeds are completely dry because you don't want to trap them in that environment where they can rot and cause problems. So I like the little sandwich bag organization. You can write the name on it, the date. It works really well for me. Also label your planted seeds. In these pictured examples on the top right, those are Keurig coffee pods. They have been scraped out, cleaned out, and sanitized. And be sure to poke holes. The Keurig will poke a hole, and the newer models will actually poke, I believe, 5 holes, which is great. But make sure you have drainage holes in whatever container you decide to use. Also, in this egg carton example, make sure you have drainage holes at the bottom. Just use a nail or a chopstick and just poke some holes. After you plant your seeds, make sure you label them. That's important because let's say the germination rate, which means, again, the seed has popped out of its shell and it's starting to grow. It varies by plant, and let's say that the germination rate of your plant is 1 week, and then 2 weeks have passed and you still don't see any growth. Well, you may have an issue there. You may have some bad seeds, or the environment you supplied wasn't appropriate. So go ahead and label and put the date on them. Store seeds in the refrigerator or a really cool area, maybe your garage, because a lot of plants, not all, but a lot of them need what's called cold stratification. They need to mimic what nature gives them, the cold cycle, the warm cycle. So I like to store my dried seeds in the refrigerator just to ensure they get that cold treatment. You can use repurposed containers, again, as I mentioned, to save money and to alleviate some of the trash going to our overburdened dumps. After you plant your seeds, be sure to cover them. They need a greenhouse-like environment, a moist environment, and a protected environment to ensure better germination. After you see the seeds growing, be sure to remove that cover because you want good air circulation. Seed viability test. This is important for seeds that you may have held onto for a while and they're several years old. You want to make sure those seeds are still viable. You don't want to waste your time planting seeds that may not be alive anymore. So what you do is get a moist paper towel, scatter your seeds on it. You know, you don't have to put as many as you see here in this picture. You could just do 10. And then what you're going to do is fold that paper towel over. So you're sandwiching your seeds in between two pieces of paper towel. Then you're going to put it into a clear Ziploc bag and zip it up. So it's got a little greenhouse type environment. Then you're going to let it sit for a week, maybe 2, depending on your the seed's germination rate. And you're going to see what all sprouts. If it sprouts, it means it's alive. And you can plant these out in your yard or in a pot. You don't have to throw these away. Now let's say that you have 10 seeds in your viability test and only 7 germinate. Well, that's a 70% success rate, right? So you can still use those seeds, but my suggestion is to plant more. If you're supposed to plant 3 in one hole, I would go ahead and put 5 or 6, double it up to ensure you're going to have those plants grow. Let's say you only have 1 seed germinate. You may not want to waste your time. You may want to just throw those in your compost pile, but that is up to you. But that is how you find out your seed viability. All right, some plants need scarification. Scarification is actually damaging the seed shell so you can help it break through. Seeds have a protective shell, and sometimes they need a little help getting out. Nature mimics this and allows this to happen with the freezing and thawing cycle. Sometimes fire can help some seeds break out of their shell. Rainwater, then dry spells of drought. Those are all ways to scarify the seed shell. Well, here are some examples of plants that need this scarification. This is not a complete list, just some examples. Morning glories, moonflowers, mountain laurel. Basically, usually plants that, seeds that are large. Cold stratification, on the other hand, is simulating the natural colder parts of the year and breaking the seed's dormancy. So the seed has gone through the cycle of summer, the heat, then winter cold, then the thaw cycle. And it tells the seed, hey, it's ready to grow, it's warm now. So that's why I say when you store your seeds, it's very important to put them in a cool environment like your refrigerator. Even if it may not need it, I go ahead and store all my seeds in the refrigerator just in case. Examples, again, this is not a complete list, are going to be butterfly bush, blackberry lily, hibiscus, catmint, primrose, sweet pea, black-eyed Susan, hens and chicks. Now note, commercially packaged and purchased seeds will already have gone through this process. They are ready to plant. This only applies to seeds you collected from friends or your own yard. Okay, indoor seed starting. After you plant and you only see soil, no plants yet, make sure you uncover that protective clear dome or plastic on top. Take that off and fan your plants a little bit to encourage some air circulation. You want to uncover it periodically to make sure you don't encourage fungus and bacteria to grow. Now remember, once you start seeing your plants, your little seedlings emerge, remove that lid. You don't need that lid anymore. Water appropriately. You should never let your plants sit in water. Watch for fungal issues, and we will go into that in more detail. Prevent damping off disease. Damping off disease symptoms are pinched or broken stems, no growth, or you might have just some patchy growth, shriveling plants, or you see fungal bacterial symptoms like the top right picture, that white puffy stuff. The pinched or broken stems are, the example is right there in the middle. It almost looks like you used your fingers and just pinched the stem. It falls over and it dies. Or the bottom right picture, your little plant just shrivels up and dies. It's usually because of the fungal or bacterial symptoms. So how do you help prevent this from happening? Prevention is key. Remember I told you about that seed starting mix? That's why it's important to have a sterile environment and the proper tools and materials. Also, I recommend using a 10% bleach solution or Lysol to sanitize your pots and tools before you start. Because why go through the trouble of having all the seed starting mix and getting all the right materials only to have some bacteria growing in some old dirty pots, and that will ruin your whole batch. So be sure to sterilize everything. I like to let mine soak for about 30 minutes in this diluted solution and then give it a good rinse and you are good to go. We talked about that. Water from the bottom. If you continually have these damping off issues, water from the bottom and don't get your leaves wet, because wet leaves can sometimes lead to fungal and bacterial issues. So gently water from the bottom. You're going to water basically the saucer or the container that's holding your little pots. And be sure if you still have water sitting there after, let's say, an hour, go ahead and dump that out. You do not want your plants sitting in water. Good air circulation, do not forget that. After you plant your seedlings, a good tip is to sprinkle cinnamon on top of the soil right after so that you discourage the fungal growth. Okay, so this still happens to the best of us. We've done everything we were supposed to do, but maybe we accidentally overwatered one day, or somebody sneezed on your seedlings and now there's bacteria in it, okay? So here are some ways to treat the problem. Manually remove what you can. You can use a little toothpick or maybe a fork and gently pry and remove those spots. Create better air circulation and recheck your watering habits. You might be watering too much. Call out, also known as remove, diseased plants. If you see some plants that are brown, shriveled up, go ahead and remove those because you don't want them spreading more of that disease. You can also mix a 1-to-1 ratio of peroxide and water and lightly spray the soil. Or dab full strength peroxide on a Q-tip and you can kind of gently dab those problematic spots and it'll kill off that pathogen. Half strength neem oil works if you have some larger plants. I wouldn't recommend this on little tiny seedlings because it could cause death. It might be too strong for them. So this would be a better option for plants that have somewhat matured. You may still lose some plants if not treated quickly, so this isn't a 100% cure. It's just to help you if you come across this problem. I don't want you guys to be discouraged just because I'm talking about the bad stuff. I'm just getting you ready for any possible issues that might arise. So, let this be a rewarding experience, and most of you will be okay. Now that you know how to plant your seeds, you will be okay, but sometimes problems arise. Now we're going to talk about thinning your seedlings. It's also known as culling. So you are basically cutting out the weaker plants to give room to your healthier, more robust plants. It's necessary to limit competition for sunlight, nutrients, and root growth. If you have too many plants crammed in one little area, they're all going to suffer. So go ahead and cull out the weakest ones. Check your label for specific thinning suggestions. On the next slide, I will show you some examples. Use small scissors to cull unwanted seedlings. The top picture where someone's pulling them out with their fingers, I don't recommend that. I recommend the bottom picture where you use tiny little shears and you just clip the stems. Once you clip the stems, they will not return. That is a dead plant. while they're that young. So use little tiny shears. When you pull a plant that's really close to another plant, you risk damaging the plant you want to keep because it's going to pull their roots up too. So use little tiny shears, please. You can also sometimes divide your seedlings. If they're a little more mature, like cucumber plants, sometimes if you go to a big box store and buy a cucumber plant that's ready to plant, you'll see 3 plants in there. Well, if it's a substantial size, you can use a fork and gently pry it apart. You may risk damaging all of them, but I have had some good success in dividing them and planting them separately. So use your best judgment on that. This is the back of 2 different seed packets, and as I talked about earlier, they tell you specifically how to thin. So after you plant your seeds, you start to see growth. On the left-hand picture, it says thin 2 to 3 per group, so you don't want 5 or 6 in your little clump, only 2 to 3. The right-hand side says 1 to 2 per hill, so follow those instructions depending on your plant. So you've had success in growing your little seedlings now, and you may not be quite ready to put them out in the yard. It just depends on what the original size of that pot was. On the left side picture here, those are tiny little pots, and that's fine, but you may want them to mature a little bit more. So bumping up means to move your plant to the next size container. Always bump up to a proper next size. Don't go from a little 2-inch container to a gallon size. That's just too big for your tiny little plant. When you water such a large container with a small plant, there's not enough uptake of water. That plant can't sit there and consume all of that water that's in that gallon pot. So it'll probably end up with pathogens, or it'll just, end up being weak. So be sure to only bump up to the next size container. All right, so this is the fun part. Your plants, they look great, they're bushy, they're ready to be planted, right? So do we take them outside to the garden? No, they are not ready. You must harden them off first. So that's called hardening off your plants. It is very important. A lot of people will mess up at this stage. And how heartbreaking is that after spending several weeks growing your little plants and then just to succumb to death in one day? Well, the reason for this is because your plants have had the luxury of living in your house in a protected environment with no wind gusts, no harsh sun. And if you just throw them outside, they will shrivel up and die. So hardening off means the process of acclimating plants and seedlings to the outside environment before planting them outside. So never ever transfer your plants grown indoors directly outside. This process helps prevent sun scorch, breakage of stems due to high winds, and transplant shock and plant death. Plants need time to adjust to the hot sun and force of the wind. This process usually takes 1 to 2 weeks. You just need to gradually increase with time. So a tip is on day 1, you can move it to a shady area like under your patio. And then day 2, maybe a little closer to the edge of that patio. And also increase your time day by day until they are outside almost all day. Then they are ready to be planted in your garden. Okay, now you're really ready to plant. Be sure you amend your garden soil before planting. Most of us have clay soil. It's nutrient deficient, it's hard, and the roots don't like that type of soil. So by amending is to add. So add compost or composted cow manure or anything that will bring more fertility to your soil and make it and help it with drainage. Clay soil does not drain well, and a lot of plants don't like that. So adding compost material will help with drainage. It'll help it retain nutrients and some moisture, and generally just make your plant's roots happy and give you better looking plants. After you plant, be sure to mulch because you want to conserve water and protect those roots, especially from the upcoming summer. And as you guys know, our summers here can be pretty brutal. And then water as needed. A lot of people love to grow tomatoes. It's a very fun plant to grow and to add to your veggie garden, so I thought it would be really important to mention here. So before you go out and buy your tomato plant or tomato seeds, I'm going to discuss indeterminate versus determinate. Indeterminate tomatoes will give you tomatoes throughout the growing season. So you'll get tomatoes here and there, great for adding to your salads, on your burgers. Determinate, on the other hand, will give you tomatoes all at once. You will be overloaded with tomatoes all at once, and you get those within 1 to 3 weeks. So that would be better for canning, for pickling. You're going to want to make salsa, marinara, things like that, or share with a lot of friends and family. The indeterminate tomatoes are more of the vining tomatoes, so they get really tall. They need a support, or they'll end up flopping on the ground. You can use a trellis, tomato cage, but a lot of times even those tomato cages are not big enough, but you know, it'll still work. Vine tomatoes also are well suited for trimming. You can trim them, make sure you don't have a lot of suckers growing on them that will suck energy from the main plant. Determinate tomato bushes are usually smaller, and you can also put them in little containers. So depending on what your needs are, you know, do you want them for salads here and there, or do you want to pickle them? Well, here is how you know how to do that. Get indeterminate if you like them throughout the season. Determinate if you want a large yield at once. Here is an example of a seed packet, the back side. This is a beefsteak tomato, the larger tomato. If you look on the right-hand side, there is no guessing on how to plant these seeds. It says, wait till your soil temperature is such and such, plant your seeds at 1/2 inch below the soil surface. Germination occurs 6 to 12 days after you plant them. What that means is you'll start to see little plants, little bitty green specks. Those are your little babies. Remember I talked about the seed viability test? That's how you know. If you don't see sprouts coming out after 6 to 12 days, you know that something went wrong. Height, they will be 3 to 5 feet tall. Maturity, 62 to 115 days. That means when you can expect to get your first tomato. And you need to put it in full sun, it says. All tomatoes need full sun. And spacing, you want your plants to be 15 to 36 inches apart. So if you look at this, where does it say indeterminate or determinate? Okay, I see it right here. Top left corner, right underneath the tomato beefsteak, it says indeterminate. So keep that in mind. On this one, this is a different type of tomato. It says clusters of pear-shaped yellow fruits with mild, delicious flavor, indeterminate. So again, this is going to be a tomato that will give you tomatoes throughout the growing season here and there. It tells you when to start it indoors, the depth, the spacing, the harvest day, and on the bottom left, it gives you the map and when to transplant those plants outside. Here is a different example, actually 2 examples. And if you'll look kind of in the middle of all those paragraphs, it says determinate on the left and determinate type on the right. So in this particular brand, it's labeled on the front side. All right, so that is all there is to know about growing plants from seeds. It's actually fairly simple. You just have to follow the guidelines. You know, don't overwater. Make sure you water at the correct time. Make sure you harden off your plants before you transplant them to your yard. Just follow those basics that we just went through and you will have great success and be able to share with others. A seed packet contains many, many seeds, probably way too much for your city garden. So you can swap with friends and just have a good time. If you have any questions, let us know.